Welcome to the ITIL 4 Mastery course. Over the next 16 chapters, we'll build a complete picture of IT service management from the service value system, through the guiding principles, to the path towards certification. In summary, your global standard for IT service management, 16 chapters, spoken start to finish, from core concepts to certification. ITIL version 3 organized work around a fixed service life cycle. ITIL 4 replaces that rigid structure with a flexible service value system, designed for organizations that need to co-create value quickly in a digital world. In summary, V3, a linear service life cycle; 4, a flexible, value-driven system, built for agile, digital organizations. At the center of ITIL 4 is the service value system. 5 elements work together inside it: guiding principles, governance, the service value chain, a set of practices, and continual improvement. In summary, guiding principles, governance, the service value chain, practices, continual improvement. Every practice in ITIL 4 is viewed through 4 dimensions: organizations and people, information and technology, partners and suppliers, and value streams and processes. Miss one, and the service falls out of balance. In summary, organizations and people, information and technology, partners and suppliers, value streams and processes. The first guiding principle is focus on value. Everything an organization does should map back to value for its stakeholders, because value is defined by the customer, not the provider. In summary, value is defined by the customer. Always ask, who benefits, and how. Every activity should map back to value. The second principle is start where you are. Resist the urge to build from a blank page. Assess what already exists, measure it honestly, and reuse whatever is already delivering value. In summary, don't discard what already works, assess the current state honestly, reuse before you rebuild. Progress iteratively with feedback means organizing work into small, manageable pieces. Fast feedback loops let you adapt quickly, instead of gambling everything on one large, slow-moving initiative. In summary, small steps, fast feedback loops, avoid big bang initiatives, comprehend before acting. Collaborate and promote visibility. Initiatives succeed faster when the right people are involved at the right time, and when decisions are made using information that everyone can see. In summary, work across silos, not around them, make decisions with visible data, involve stakeholders early. Think and work holistically. No single team, tool, or practice operates in isolation. Value is created through the coordinated effort of the whole organization. In summary, no practice stands alone. Coordinate across the 4 dimensions, end-to-end thinking, not siloed fixes. Keep it simple and practical. If a process, a control, or a metric doesn't clearly contribute to an outcome, it should be simplified or removed. In summary, use the minimum steps needed. Fewer, clearer practices win. Judge every step by its outcome. The 7th principle is optimize and automate. Automation should come after a process is already streamlined. Automating a broken process just makes it fail faster. In summary, maximize the value of human effort. Automate only what's already optimized. Technology should remove friction. The service value chain connects 6 activities: plan, improve, engage, design and transition, obtain or build, and deliver and support, combining them in different sequences to respond to any demand. In summary, plan rightward arrow, improve rightward arrow, engage, design and transition, obtain/build, deliver and support. ITIL 4 organizes 34 practices into 3 groups: general management, service management, and technical management. 24 of them map onto renamed or reshaped ITIL V3 processes, which we'll cover in the V3 life cycle chapters ahead. The other 10 things like risk management, architecture management, and workforce and talent management have no V3 equivalent at all, and get their own dedicated chapters later in this course. In summary, general management practices, service management practices, technical management practices, 24 map onto renamed V3 processes, 10 are entirely new to ITIL 4. ITIL 4 was designed to sit alongside Agile, Lean, DevOps, Cloud, and AI, not to replace them. It provides the governance and value focus that ties fast-moving delivery practices back to business outcomes. In summary, Agile and Lean for delivery speed, DevOps for continuous delivery, Cloud and AI as enabling technology. Certification begins at Foundation, and branches through Managing Professional and Strategic Leader, before culminating in ITIL Master, reserved for practitioners who can prove applied, real-world expertise. In summary, Foundation: the core concepts, Managing Professional hands-on practice, Strategic Leader business alignment, Master proven, applied expertise. ITIL V3 organizes IT service management around a 5-stage life cycle: service strategy, service design, service transition, and service operation, with continual service improvement wrapping around all of them. Together they define 26 processes and 4 supporting functions. In summary, service strategy, rightward arrow; design, rightward arrow; transition, rightward arrow; operation, continual service improvement wraps around all 26 processes, plus 4 supporting functions. The workflow moves through 5 steps: strategy, design, transition, operation, and CSI, ongoing. Here's how that plays out in practice. For strategy, Meridian Bank decides to launch a mobile check deposit feature after seeing customer demand. For design, the design team specifies the SLA, security controls, and capacity needed for the new feature. For transition, IT builds, tests, and packages the release, then rolls it out to a pilot branch first. For operation, once live, the service desk and ops team run the feature day-to-day, handling requests and incidents. For CSI, ongoing, every quarter, Meridian reviews usage data and rolls out small improvements to the feature. Strategy decides what services an organization should offer, and why. It aligns IT investment with business outcomes, before a single service is ever designed. In summary, decides what services to offer, and why, aligns IT investment with business outcomes. 5 processes set direction for everything downstream. The workflow moves through 4 steps: assess market, define services, set strategy, and plan investment. Here's how that plays out in practice. For assess market, Meridian studies fintech competitors offering instant peer-to-peer transfers. For define services, they decide to offer a new instant pay service to retail customers. For set strategy, leadership sets a strategy to launch instant pay within 2 quarters, prioritizing security over speed. For plan investment, the board approves a $2 million budget for the platform build and staffing. Strategy management for IT services defines the perspective, position, plans, and patterns an organization needs to meet its business outcomes. It starts with a strategic assessment, then turns that into tactical and operational plans. Purpose, sets direction and objectives for all IT services. Key activity, strategic assessment of market spaces and capability. Key concept, the 4Ps: perspective, position, plan, pattern. In ITIL 4, this maps to strategy management, same core practice, broadened IT services. The workflow moves through 5 steps: assess situation, set objectives, define 4Ps, build plans, and execute and review. Here's how that plays out in practice. For assess situation, Meridian audits its current online banking capability against 3 competitor banks. For set objectives, IT sets an objective to reduce login failures by 30% within a year. For define 4PS, they define their position as a digital-first bank and their pattern as rising self-service demand. For build plans, the strategic assessment turns into a tactical 12-month roadmap for the digital channel team. For execute and review, quarterly reviews check the roadmap's progress against the original objectives. Service portfolio management decides which services a provider should offer, based on their ability to deliver value. Every service sits in one of 3 states: the pipeline, the live catalog, or retired. Purpose decides which services to invest in, develop, or retire. Key activity, evaluating business cases for proposed services. Key concept, pipeline, catalog, and retired, the 3 parts of the portfolio. In ITIL 4, this maps to portfolio management broadened to the whole organization's portfolio, not just services. The workflow moves through 4 steps: define, analyze, approve, and charter. Here's how that plays out in practice. For define, a proposed chatbot support service is logged in the pipeline with a rough business case. For analyze, finance analyzes the projected cost savings against the development cost of the chatbot. For approve, the portfolio board approves the chatbot for development, moving it toward the live catalog. For charter, a project charter is issued, assigning budget, owner, and delivery dates for the chatbot. Financial management for IT services gives both the business and IT a clear, quantified view of what services actually cost and deliver. It covers budgeting, accounting, and where used charging for services. Purpose gives quantified financial visibility into service value. Key activity, budgeting, IT accounting, and charging. Key concept, separates cost management from simple cost cutting. In ITIL 4, this maps to service financial management, same practice, renamed. The workflow moves through 4 steps: budget, account, charge, and report and review. Here's how that plays out in practice. For budget, Meridian sets an annual IT budget of $40 million across infrastructure, staff, and licenses. For account, IT tracks actual cloud hosting spend against the budgeted amount every month. For charge, business units are charged internally per transaction processed through the payments platform. For report and review, finance reports cost per transaction trends to the CIO each quarter. Demand management studies patterns of business activity and builds user profiles to anticipate how much of a service will actually be needed. Left unmanaged, demand becomes one of the biggest sources of wasted cost and risk. Purpose understands and shapes customer demand for services. Key activity, analyzing patterns of business activity, PBA. Key concept, unmanaged demand is a major source of cost and risk. In ITIL 4, this maps to no longer standalone, absorbed into portfolio management and service design. The workflow moves through 4 steps: identify PBAs, build user profiles, analyze demand, and influence and manage. Here's how that plays out in practice. For identify PBAs, data shows mobile banking logins spike every payday, on the 25th of the month. For build user profiles, Meridian segments users into commuter mobile users and desktop business users. For analyze demand, capacity planners study the spikes to predict server load on payday mornings. For influence and manage, off-peak notifications encourage some users to check balances later, easing the 8 a.m. rush. Business relationship management keeps the provider tuned into what the customer actually needs, acting as their voice inside the organization. It operates at the strategic relationship level, above the day-to-day work of service-level management. Purpose maintains the strategic relationship between IT and the business. Key activity, understanding evolving customer business outcomes. Key concept, sits above service level management, at the relationship level. In ITIL 4, this maps to relationship management broadened beyond IT/business stakeholder relationships. The workflow moves through 4 steps: identify stakeholders, understand outcomes, maintain relationship, and measure satisfaction. Here's how that plays out in practice. For identify stakeholders, the BRM identifies the head of retail banking as the key stakeholder for the deposit app. For understand outcomes, regular meetings reveal the business actually wants faster loan approvals, not just more uptime. For maintain relationship, the BRM holds monthly check-ins with business unit heads to stay aligned on priorities. For measure satisfaction, an annual stakeholder survey shows satisfaction with IT rose from 68% to 82%. Service design takes strategy and turns it into a workable design, balancing functionality, cost, and risk before anything goes live. 8 processes cover everything from service levels to security to supplier contracts. In summary, designs new or changed services for live operation, balances functionality, cost, and risk. 8 processes cover everything from SLAs to security. The workflow moves through 4 steps: requirements, design, package, SDP, and hand off to transition. Here's how that plays out in practice. For requirements, the business requires the new deposit feature to be PCI DSS compliant and support 5,000 concurrent users. For design, architects design the service, including its SLA, security controls, and support model. For package, SDP, all designs are compiled into a single service design package ready for build. For hand off to transition, the completed SDP is handed to the transition team to begin building and testing. Design coordination is the single point of coordination for every design activity happening across the organization. It produces the service design package that gets handed off into service transition. Purpose: single point of coordination for all design activity. Key activity: producing the service design package, SDP. Key concept: ensures consistency across multiple concurrent projects. In ITIL 4, this maps to no longer standalone coordination is now built into how every practice designs services. The workflow moves through 4 steps: set design policy, coordinate resources, produce SDP, and hand off. Here's how that plays out in practice. For set design policy, Meridian mandates that every new service must include a documented rollback plan. For coordinate resources, design coordination allocates architects across 3 concurrent projects to avoid conflicts. For produce SDP, a consolidated SDP is produced covering the mobile deposit and instant pay projects together. For handoff, the finished SDP package is formally handed off to transition planning and support. Service catalog management maintains a single, accurate source of information about every live service. It keeps a customer-facing business catalog in sync with the technical catalog underneath it. Purpose: maintains one accurate source of live service information. Key activity: keeping the business and technical catalogs in sync. Key concept: business catalog, customer-facing, versus technical catalog, infrastructure. In ITIL 4, this maps to service catalog management largely unchanged. The workflow moves through 4 steps: define service, document, sync catalogs, and publish and maintain. Here's how that plays out in practice. For define service, online bill pay is defined as its own distinct catalog entry. For document, documentation covers the cost, SLA, and support contact for online bill pay. For sync catalogs, the customer-facing catalog entry is kept consistent with the technical catalog underneath it. For publish and maintain, the catalog is published on the intranet and updated whenever the service changes. Service level management negotiates, agrees, and monitors SLAs, making sure every operational process actually meets them. It distinguishes SLAs with customers, OLAs between internal teams, and underpinning contracts with external suppliers. Purpose, negotiates and monitors service level agreements. Key activity, running regular service reviews. Key concept, SLA, to customer, OLA, internal, UC, external supplier. In ITIL 4, this maps to service level management. Same practice, stronger focus on customer experience. The workflow moves through 4 steps: draft SLA/OLA, negotiate and agree, monitor and review and improve. Here's how that plays out in practice. For draft SLA/OLA, a draft SLA proposes 99.9% uptime for online banking. For negotiate and agree, retail banking negotiates the SLA up to 99.95% given how critical payments are to the business. For monitor, uptime is monitored continuously via dashboards showing real-time availability against the target. For review and improve, a quarterly service review flags 2 SLA breaches and agrees on an improvement plan. Availability management makes sure services deliver the availability levels the business agreed to, and does it cost-effectively. It constantly measures availability, reliability, and maintainability against that target. Purpose, ensures services meet agreed availability targets. Key activity, measuring availability, reliability, and maintainability. Key concept, availability % equals, agreed time downtime, divided by agreed time. In ITIL 4, this maps to availability management largely unchanged. The workflow moves through 4 steps: determine requirements, design for availability, monitor, and investigate gaps. Here's how that plays out in practice. For determine requirements, the payments platform is agreed to need 99.99% availability given its revenue impact. For design for availability, architects add a secondary data center so the service can fail over automatically. For monitor, availability is tracked in real time, a dashboard shows 99.992% for this month. For investigate gaps, a dip to 99.9% last month triggers an investigation into a faulty load balancer. Capacity management makes sure there's always enough IT capacity to meet demand, without overspending on unused headroom. It works across 3 levels: business, service, and individual components. Purpose, ensures enough cost-justifiable capacity exists. Key activity, capacity modeling and performance monitoring. Key concept, business, service, and component subdisciplines. In ITIL 4, this maps to capacity and performance management renamed, performance added explicitly. The workflow moves through 4 steps: gather demand data, model capacity, monitor, and tune and plan. Here's how that plays out in practice. For gather demand data, historical transaction volumes show Black Friday traffic triples the normal level. For model capacity, capacity planners model server needs for 3x traffic plus 20% headroom. For monitor, live dashboards track CPU and database load throughout the Black Friday sale. For tune and plan, findings from the event feed into next year's capacity plan and budget request. IT service continuity management prepares for the risks that could seriously disrupt a service, through business impact analysis, risk assessment, and tested recovery plans. It's the IT arm of the organization's wider business continuity strategy. Purpose, manages risks that could seriously disrupt IT services. Key activity, business impact analysis and recovery planning. Key concept, aligns with the organization's wider business continuity management. In ITIL 4, this maps to service continuity management renamed, drops IT for a broader scope. The workflow moves through 4 steps: business impact analysis, risk assessment, build recovery plan, and test and maintain. Here's how that plays out in practice. For business impact analysis, analysis shows a core banking outage would cost Meridian $500,000 per hour in lost transactions. For risk assessment, risks like data center flooding or ransomware are scored by likelihood and impact. For build recovery plan, a disaster recovery plan sets a 4-hour recovery time objective for core banking. For test and maintain, an annual DR test simulates a data center failure and confirms the 4-hour target is met. Information security management aligns IT security with the business's own security needs, protecting the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information. It sets policy, assesses risk, and manages security incidents as they happen. Purpose: protects confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information. Key activity: setting policy and assessing risk. Key concept: the CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, availability. In ITIL 4, this maps to information security management largely unchanged. The workflow moves through 4 steps: set policy, assess risk, implement controls, and manage incidents. Here's how that plays out in practice. For set policy, Meridian sets a policy requiring multi-factor authentication for all admin access. For assess risk, a risk assessment flags an unpatched VPN gateway as a high-priority vulnerability. For implement controls, patch management and MFA are rolled out to close the gaps the assessment found. For manage incidents, a phishing attempt targeting employees is detected and contained within hours. Supplier management manages every external supplier and the contracts that underpin service delivery, making sure the organization gets real value for money. Suppliers are categorized by risk and importance, and tracked in the supplier and contract database. Purpose: manages suppliers and contracts that support services. Key activity: categorizing suppliers by risk and importance. Key concept: maintains the supplier and contract database, SCD. In ITIL 4, this maps to supplier management largely unchanged. The workflow moves through 4 steps: identify needs, evaluate and select, negotiate contract, and manage performance. Here's how that plays out in practice. For identify needs, Meridian needs a cloud SMS provider to deliver one-time passwords to customers. For evaluate and select, 3 SMS providers are compared on cost, reliability, and delivery speed. For negotiate contract, a contract is signed with an agreed 99.5% delivery slot and penalty clauses for missing it. For manage performance, monthly reports show the supplier consistently exceeding the agreed delivery rate. Service transition takes a designed service and moves it safely into live operation, managing the risk of anything going wrong along the way. 7 processes govern how changes, releases, and knowledge move through this stage. In summary, moves designed services safely into live operation, manages risk during build, test, and deployment. 7 processes govern change, release, and knowledge. The workflow moves through 4 steps: plan transition, build and test, deploy, and support and review. Here's how that plays out in practice. For plan transition, a transition plan is created for rolling out the new mobile check deposit feature. For build and test, developers build the feature and QA runs regression tests against existing banking functions. For deploy, the feature is deployed first to a pilot group of 500 customers. For support and review, early life support monitors the pilot closely before Meridian approves a full rollout. Transition planning and support coordinates the resources needed to meet service design's requirements as work moves into transition. It keeps every project using a standard, repeatable approach instead of reinventing the process each time. Purpose: coordinates resources across all transition activity. Key activity: planning capacity and resources for each transition. Key concept: ensures standard, repeatable approaches are used. In ITIL 4, this maps to no longer standalone planning is distributed across the other practices. The workflow moves through 4 steps: define strategy, prepare transition, plan resources, and coordinate and monitor. Here's how that plays out in practice. For define strategy, a transition strategy sets a phased rollout, not big bang, as the approach for the deposit feature. For prepare transition, environments, test data, and rollback scripts are prepared ahead of the release. For plan resources, 2 developers and 1 tester are allocated for the 2-week transition window. For coordinate and monitor, daily stand-ups track progress and flag any resourcing conflicts with other projects. Change management controls the entire life cycle of change, so beneficial changes happen with minimal disruption and risk. Every request for change is logged, assessed, and for anything beyond routine authorized by the Change Advisory Board. Purpose: controls the life cycle of changes to minimize disruption. Key activity: assessing requests for change, RFCs, via the CAB. Key concept: standard, normal, and emergency change types. In ITIL 4, this maps to change enablement renamed, with a stronger risk-based approach. The workflow moves through 4 steps: log RFC, assess and evaluate, authorize, CAB, and build, test and review. Here's how that plays out in practice. For log RFC, a request for change is logged to upgrade the core banking database server. For assess and evaluate, the change is assessed for risk, since it touches a system used by 2 million customers. For authorize, CAB, the Change Advisory Board approves the change for a Saturday night maintenance window. For build, test and review, the upgrade is performed, tested, and reviewed the following Monday to confirm no issues. Service asset and configuration management tracks every asset and configuration item, along with the relationships between them, inside the configuration management database. It's the foundation that almost every other process relies on for accurate data. Purpose: tracks assets and configuration items, SIS, and their relationships. Key activity: maintaining the configuration management database, CMDB. Key concept: part of the wider configuration management system, CMS. In ITIL 4, this maps to split into service configuration management and IT asset management. The workflow moves through 4 steps: plan, identify SIS, control and baseline, and verify and audit. Here's how that plays out in practice. For plan, a plan is created to track every server, application, and license as a configuration item. For identify SIS, the core banking application server is logged as CICBS prod 01 in the CMDB. For control and baseline, a baseline configuration is recorded before the quarterly patch cycle begins. For verify and audit, a quarterly audit finds 2 undocumented servers and adds them to the CMDB. Release and deployment management builds, tests, and delivers the capability that service design specified, from a single package to a phased rollout. It chooses between big bang or phased releases and push or pull deployment, depending on the risk involved. Purpose: builds, tests, and delivers new service capability. Key activity: planning release packages and deployment approach. Key concept: big bang versus phased, push versus pull deployment. In ITIL 4, this maps to split into release management and deployment management. The workflow moves through 4 steps: plan release, build and test, deploy, pilot, and early life support. Here's how that plays out in practice. For plan release, Release R 4.2 is planned to bundle the mobile deposit feature with 3 bug fixes. For build and test, the release package is built and passes both automated and manual test suites. For deploy, pilot R 4.2 is pushed to a pilot branch first, using a phased deployment approach. For early life support, the release team monitors closely for the first 72 hours, ready to roll back if needed. Service validation and testing confirms that what's about to go live actually matches what service design promised. It runs plan tests against clear acceptance criteria before anything gets signed off. Purpose, confirms a new or changed service meets its design. Key activity, executing tests against defined acceptance criteria. Key concept, validates the service, not just its individual components. In ITIL 4, this maps to service validation and testing, same name and scope. The workflow moves through 4 steps: define test model, plan tests, execute tests, and evaluate and sign off. Here's how that plays out in practice. For define test model, a test model defines that the deposit feature must handle 5,000 concurrent uploads. For plan tests, test cases are written covering normal use, fraud attempts, and network failure scenarios. For execute tests, testers execute the plan, uploading test checks under simulated peak load. For evaluate and sign off, results meet all acceptance criteria, and the business signs off for release. Change evaluation gives major changes a consistent, independent check before they're allowed to proceed, comparing what was predicted against what actually happened in testing. Its findings feed straight back into the change management decision. Purpose, provides a consistent way to evaluate major changes. Key activity, comparing predicted versus actual performance. Key concept, feeds its findings directly into change management's decision. In ITIL 4, this maps to no longer standalone, folded into change enablement. The workflow moves through 4 steps: plan evaluation, predicted performance, actual performance, and report to change management. Here's how that plays out in practice. For plan evaluation, an evaluation plan is set for the database upgrade, focused on transaction latency. For predicted performance, modeling predicted that latency would drop by 15% after the upgrade. For actual performance, post-upgrade testing shows latency actually dropped by 12%, close to the prediction. For report to change management, the evaluation report goes to the CAB, confirming the change met its objective. Knowledge management makes sure the right information reaches the right people at the right time to support good decisions. It builds on the DIKW model, turning raw data into information, knowledge, and eventually wisdom, inside the service knowledge management system. Purpose, gets the right information to the right people at the right time. Key activity, building the service knowledge management system, SKMS. Key concept, the DIKW model: data, information, knowledge, wisdom. In ITIL 4, this maps to knowledge management largely unchanged. The workflow moves through 4 steps: identify needs, capture data, structure, SKMS, and share and reuse. Here's how that plays out in practice. For identify needs, support agents need faster answers to "why did my transfer fail" questions. For capture data, common failure causes and fixes are documented from recent incident tickets. For structure, SKMS, the articles are added to the service knowledge management system, tagged by category. For share and reuse, service desk agents use the new knowledge articles to resolve calls in half the time. Service operation is where value actually gets delivered, running live services day to day. 5 processes handle everything from routine requests to full-blown incidents. In summary, runs live services day to day, where value is actually delivered to users. 5 processes handle events, incidents, and requests. The workflow moves through 4 steps: monitor, detect, respond, and restore. Here's how that plays out in practice. For monitor, dashboards continuously monitor the online banking platform's health. For detect, a spike in failed logins is detected on a Tuesday morning. For respond, the operations team investigates and identifies an authentication server issue. For restore, the server is restarted and normal login service is restored within 20 minutes. Event management watches infrastructure and services continuously, filtering and correlating events to spot what actually matters. Every event is categorized as informational, a warning, or an exception requiring action. Purpose: monitors infrastructure and services to detect meaningful events. Key activity: filtering and correlating events for significance. Key concept: 3 event types: informational, warning, exception. In ITIL 4, this maps to monitoring and event management, renamed monitoring made explicit. The workflow moves through 4 steps: generate event, filter, correlate and categorize, and trigger response. Here's how that plays out in practice. For generate event, a server reports CPU usage crossing 90%. For filter, the monitoring tool filters out routine CPU spikes that last less than 2 minutes. For correlate and categorize, the sustained spike is correlated with a batch job and categorized as a warning. For trigger response, an automated alert notifies the ops team before it becomes a full outage. Incident management exists to restore normal service as quickly as possible whenever something breaks, minimizing the impact on the business. Priority is driven by impact multiplied by urgency, and major incidents get their own expedited procedure. Purpose: restores normal service as fast as possible. Key activity: logging, diagnosing, and resolving disruptions. Key concept: priority equals impact times urgency, major incidents get an expedited path. In ITIL 4, this maps to incident management largely unchanged. The workflow moves through 4 steps: log incident, categorize and prioritize, diagnose and resolve and close. Here's how that plays out in practice. For log incident, a customer calls in reporting the mobile app won't let them log in. For categorize and prioritize, it's categorized as authentication, mobile, and given high priority given 200 similar reports. For diagnose, the team traces the issue to an expired security certificate on the auth server. For resolve and close, the certificate is renewed, login is restored, and the ticket is closed with the customer notified. Request fulfillment handles the routine, low-risk requests users make every day, password resets, access requests, standard hardware. Common requests follow a predefined model so they can be fulfilled quickly and consistently. Purpose: handles routine, low-risk user requests. Key activity: using request models for common, repeatable requests. Key concept: distinct from incident management, nothing here is actually broken. In ITIL 4, this maps to service request management, renamed. The workflow moves through 4 steps: log request, approve, fulfill, via model, and close and review. Here's how that plays out in practice. For log request, an employee submits a request for access to the loan processing system. For approve, their manager approves the access request through the standard workflow. For fulfill, via model, IT grants access using the predefined loan officer access model. For close and review, the request is closed, and a satisfaction survey is sent to the employee. Problem management goes after root causes, so incidents stop happening in the first place, or so their impact shrinks when they can't be prevented. Every confirmed root cause and its workaround gets recorded in the known error database. Purpose: eliminates root causes to prevent future incidents. Key activity: root cause analysis and proactive trend analysis. Key concept: maintains the known error database, KEDB. In ITIL 4, this maps to problem management largely unchanged. The workflow moves through 4 steps: detect problem, investigate root cause, record known error, and resolve and review. Here's how that plays out in practice. For detect problem, after the 3rd login outage this month, a problem record is raised. For investigate root cause analysis reveals the certificate renewal process isn't automated. For record known error, a known error is logged, manual cert renewal causes periodic auth outages. For resolve and review, auto renewal is implemented, and a review confirms no repeat outages for 6 months. Access management grants authorized users the rights they need to use a service, while keeping unauthorized users out. It puts information security management's policies into practice, every single day. Purpose: grants authorized users the right to use a service. Key activity: verifying, granting, and revoking access rights. Key concept: executes the policies set by information security management. In ITIL 4, this maps to, no longer standalone, folded into information security management and the service desk. The workflow moves through 4 steps: verify request, grant rights, monitor status, and revoke when needed. Here's how that plays out in practice. For verify request, a new hire's access request is verified against HR records and their manager's approval. For grant rights, access to email, VPN, and the CRM system is granted based on their role. For monitor status, access rights are reviewed periodically to make sure they still match the employee's role. For revoke when needed, when the employee leaves the bank, all their access is revoked the same day. Continual service improvement wraps around every other stage, constantly looking for ways to measure and improve services over their lifetime. It's built directly on the Deming cycle: plan, do, check, act. In summary, wraps around all 4 other stages, continuously, measures and improves services over their lifetime, built on the Deming cycle: plan, do, check, act. The workflow moves through 4 steps: plan, do, check, and act. Here's how that plays out in practice. For plan, a plan is made to reduce average incident resolution time by 20%. For do, new triage guidelines are rolled out to the service desk team. For check, after 3 months, data shows resolution time dropped by 15%. For act, the team refines the guidelines further and standardizes them across all shifts. The 7-step improvement process is CSI's engine, from identifying what to measure, through gathering and analyzing the data, to presenting findings and implementing the improvement. Every opportunity gets logged in the CSI register and tracked through to completion. Purpose: turns raw data into real, implemented improvements. Key activity: gathering, processing, and analyzing performance data. Key concept: logged and tracked in the CSI register. In ITIL 4, this maps to, continual improvement broadened to an organization-wide practice. The workflow moves through 6 steps: identify strategy, define measures, gather data, analyze, present, and implement. Alongside the 26 processes, 4 functions provide the teams and tools that carry them out: the service desk, technical management, application management, and IT operations management. Functions are the who and the what, processes are the how. In ITIL 4, this maps to, service desk becomes a full practice, the other 3 fold into infrastructure and platform management plus software development and management. In summary, service desk single point of contact for users, technical management expertise for IT infrastructure, application management manages applications through their life cycle, IT operations management day-to-day operational tasks and facilities. The workflow moves through 4 steps: service desk, technical management, application management, and IT operations management. ITIL 4 didn't just rename V3's processes, it introduced practices with no direct predecessor at all, covering everything from enterprise architecture to workforce planning. The next chapters walk through each one, exactly the way we covered every ITIL V3 process, its own workflow, and a worked example. In summary, 10 practices with no direct ITIL V3 process equivalent, reflect modern needs: architecture, risk, talent, agile delivery, same treatment as every V3 process, full workflow and a worked example. Architecture management gives the organization a single, end-to-end view of its business, information, and technology architecture, so no design decision gets made in isolation. It sets the principles and standards that every other practice designs against. Purpose, provides an end-to-end view of all types of architecture: business, service, information, technology. Key activity, maintaining architecture models, principles, and standards for decision-making. Key concept, keeps individual designs aligned with the wider organizational strategy. The workflow moves through 4 steps: assess current state, define target architecture, set principles and standards, and govern design decisions. Here's how that plays out in practice. For assess current state, the organization documents its current application landscape across 40 legacy systems. For define target architecture, a target architecture is defined to consolidate onto a single cloud-native platform by 2028. For set principles and standards, architecture principles are published requiring all new services to be API first. For govern design decisions, a proposed new CRM system is reviewed against the principles before it's approved. Risk management makes sure the organization understands the risks it's carrying and handles them deliberately, rather than by accident. It runs across every other practice, weighing risk appetite against opportunity, not just avoiding threats. Purpose, ensures the organization understands and effectively handles risk. Key activity, identifying, assessing, and treating risks across every other practice. Key concept, weighs risk appetite against opportunity, not just threat avoidance. The workflow moves through 4 steps: identify risk, assess likelihood and impact, treat or accept, and monitor and review. Here's how that plays out in practice. For identify risk, a risk is identified: the only engineer who understands the legacy payments system is retiring. For assess likelihood and impact, it's assessed as high impact, medium likelihood, and logged in the risk register. For treat or accept, the risk is treated by pairing the engineer with 2 juniors for knowledge transfer. For monitor and review, the register is reviewed quarterly, confirming the risk rating has since dropped. Measurement and reporting exists to support good decisions with data that's actually valid and meaningful, not just numbers that look good on a slide. It's about designing metrics tied to outcomes, and being honest about what a metric will and won't tell you. Purpose, supports good decision-making through valid, meaningful data. Key activity, designing metrics that measure outcomes, not just activity. Key concept, guards against vanity metrics that look good but drive the wrong behavior. The workflow moves through 4 steps: define objective, select metrics, collect and analyze, and report and act. Here's how that plays out in practice. For define objective, the objective is to learn whether a new self-service portal is reducing ticket volume. For select metrics, metrics chosen are deflection rate and repeat contact rate, not just page visits. For collect and analyze, 8 weeks of data show deflection is up, but repeat contact rate is rising too. For report and act, the report flags incomplete self-service answers as the cause, prompting a content fix. Organizational change management handles the human side of change communication, training, and adoption so people-facing initiatives actually stick. It's easy to confuse with change enablement, but that practice governs IT service changes, this one governs how people adapt. Purpose, ensures changes to an organization are smoothly and successfully implemented. Key activity, managing the people side of change communication, training, adoption. Key concept, distinct from change enablement, which governs IT service changes. The workflow moves through 4 steps: assess impact on people, plan communication and training, support adoption, and reinforce and sustain. Here's how that plays out in practice. For assess impact on people, rolling out a new ticketing tool is assessed as high impact for a 200-person support team. For plan communication and training, a training plan and phased communication schedule is built ahead of go live. For support adoption, team champions run drop-in sessions during the first 2 weeks after launch. For reinforce and sustain, usage data 3 months later confirms 95% of tickets are logged in the new tool. Project management ensures projects the one-off, time-bound pieces of work are delivered on time, on budget, and to the right quality. It typically leans on an established method like Prince2 or the PMI framework, adapted to fit agile ways of working. Purpose: ensures all projects are successfully delivered on time, budget, and quality. Key activity: planning, coordinating, and controlling resources across the project life cycle. Key concept: often applies an established method, such as Prince2 or PMI/Agile. The workflow moves through 4 steps: initiate and define scope, plan resources and timeline, execute and monitor, and close and review. Here's how that plays out in practice. For initiate and define scope, a project is initiated to migrate the core banking data center to a new region. For plan resources and timeline, a 9-month plan is built with milestones for network, data, and application cutover. For execute and monitor, weekly status reviews track progress and flag a 2-week schedule risk. For close and review, the project closes on time after a scope trim, with lessons logged for next time. Workforce and talent management makes sure the organization has the right people with the right skills in the right roles, now and in the future. It treats a skills gap the same way risk management treats any other risk, something to plan for, not react to. Purpose: ensures the organization has the right people, with the right skills, in the right roles. Key activity: workforce planning, recruitment, skills development, succession planning. Key concept: treats a skills gap as an organizational risk, not just an HR concern. The workflow moves through 4 steps: assess skills and demand, plan recruitment and development, recruit, train, or reskill, and review and succession plan. Here's how that plays out in practice. For assess skills and demand, a skills assessment finds the team has no in-house cloud security expertise. For plan recruitment and development, a plan is set to hire 1 senior cloud security engineer and upskill 2 existing staff. For recruit, train, or reskill, 2 engineers complete a cloud security certification within the quarter. For review and succession plan, a succession plan is documented so the new capability isn't a single point of failure. Business analysis digs into a business problem before anyone starts designing a solution, making sure the real need is understood, documented, and validated. It's the bridge between loan approvals are too slow and a service that actually fixes it. Purpose: analyzes a business or business area and defines its needs. Key activity: eliciting, documenting, and validating requirements. Key concept: bridges the gap between a business problem and a service solution. The workflow moves through 4 steps: understand business problem, elicit requirements, document and validate, and hand off to design. Here's how that plays out in practice. For understand business problem, branch staff report that loan approvals are taking 9 days on average. For elicit requirements, analysts interview underwriters and map the current approval workflow step by step. For document and validate, requirements are documented, showing 3 manual handoffs cause most of the delay. For hand off to design, the validated requirements are handed to service design to shape the new workflow. IT asset management manages the full life cycle of every IT asset, hardware, software, and licenses to control cost and financial risk. Where service configuration management tracks how assets relate to each other, this practice tracks what they cost, what they're worth, and when they need replacing or renewing. Purpose: plans and manages the full life cycle of IT assets for value and cost control. Key activity: tracking asset value, cost, license position, and end of life. Key concept, split out from V3's service asset and configuration management, focused on cost and contracts rather than CI relationships. The workflow moves through 4 steps: register asset, track usage and cost, manage license position, and retire or renew. Here's how that plays out in practice. For register asset, 1,200 laptops are registered in the asset register when the leasing contract is signed. For track usage and cost, usage tracking shows 150 laptops sitting unused in a warehouse for 6 months. For manage license position, a license audit finds the company is overdeployed on database licenses by 30 seats. For retire or renew, aging laptops are retired on schedule, avoiding an unbudgeted emergency purchase. Infrastructure and platform management looks after the servers, networks, cloud platforms, and containers that every service actually runs on. It's a technology-facing practice, less about process, more about keeping the engine room reliable and scalable. Purpose: oversees the infrastructure and platforms used to develop and run services. Key activity: managing servers, networks, cloud platforms, and containers. Key concept: technology-facing, not process-facing, the practice that runs the engine room. The workflow moves through 4 steps: design platform, provision and configure, monitor and maintain, and scale or decommission. Here's how that plays out in practice. For design platform, a Kubernetes platform is designed to host the bank's new microservices. For provision and configure, the platform is provisioned across 2 regions for redundancy. For monitor and maintain, automated monitoring flags a node running at 90% memory during peak hours. For scale or decommission, the node pool is scaled up automatically, and an old, unused cluster is decommissioned. Software development and management covers the whole life cycle of an application: designing it, building it, testing it, and keeping it running so it keeps meeting stakeholder needs on functionality, reliability, and cost. It's the practice most closely tied to Agile and DevOps ways of working. Purpose: ensures applications meet stakeholder needs for functionality, reliability, and cost. Key activity: designing, coding, testing, and maintaining applications. Key concept: covers the whole application lifecycle, not just the initial build. The workflow moves through 4 steps: design and code, test and integrate, release and maintain, and retire or refactor. Here's how that plays out in practice. For design and code, developers design and code a new fraud detection module for the payments app. For test and integrate, the module passes integration tests in the CI pipeline before merge. For release and maintain, it's released to production and maintained through weekly patch cycles. For retire or refactor, 2 years later, the module is refactored to use a faster detection model. That's the complete course. You've covered ITIL 4's service value system and guiding principles, the full ITIL V3 life cycle of 5 stages, 26 processes, and 4 functions, and all 10 ITIL 4 practices with no V3 equivalent. Subscribe for more IT service management deep dives. In summary, ITIL 4, the service value system, guiding principles and all 34 practices. ITIL V3, 5 stages, 26 processes, 4 functions, both frameworks, side by side, start to finish. GRC stands for governance, risk, and compliance. Governance is about direction: the policies, committees, and accountability structures that steer IT decisions, like a CIO steering committee approving a cloud strategy. Risk is about identifying and rating what could go wrong, so the organization can decide to accept, treat, transfer, or avoid it. Compliance is about proving, with evidence, that the organization meets laws, contracts, and standards like ISO 27001 or PCI DSS. A GRC professional's job is to sit between the people running IT day to day, the people securing it, and the people auditing it, translating between all three. In summary, governance, who decides, and how decisions are steered; risk, what could go wrong, and how bad it could be; compliance, proving you meet laws, contracts and standards. A GRC professional sits between IT ops, security, and audit. Here's the connection most people miss: a GRC or IT audit role doesn't just read policies, it tests whether real, day-to-day IT operations actually follow them. Those day-to-day operations are exactly what ITIL describes: incident management, change enablement, access management, service desk. When Meridian Bank's auditor asks, "Show me evidence that only approved changes go to production," the answer lies inside the ITIL change enablement process and its ticketing tool. Without understanding ITIL, a GRC professional can't ask the right questions, sample the right records, or spot when a process is broken. That's why ITIL V3 certification and ITSM process knowledge sit right at the top of most IT auditor and governance job descriptions. In summary, ITIL processes are the evidence trail a GRC review relies on. Incident, change and access records prove controls are operating. You can't audit a process you don't understand. ITIL V3/4 fluency is a stated requirement for IT auditor/GRC roles. Information technology, or IT, is the umbrella term for everything an organization uses to create, process, store, secure, and exchange electronic data: computers, networks, software, and the people and processes that run them. When a job description says excellent understanding of IT infrastructure, it's really asking, do you understand this whole ecosystem well enough to know where the risk and control points sit inside it? In summary, the use of computers, networks and software to create, store, and move data, covers hardware, applications, infrastructure, and the people/processes around them, the broad umbrella that ITSM, security, and audit all operate inside. Information is data with context. A raw number becomes information the moment it means something, like $4,200 becoming Sarah's account balance. This distinction matters in GRC because ISO 27001 doesn't exist to protect servers for their own sake. It exists to protect information, wherever it lives, on a server, in an email, on paper, or spoken in a meeting. Every control is judged against three properties: confidentiality, keeping it from unauthorized eyes; integrity, keeping it accurate and unaltered; and availability, keeping it accessible when needed. That triad, CIA, is the yardstick a GRC professional uses to judge whether any given control actually matters. In summary, data that has been given meaning or context: a balance, a record, a log, the actual thing security exists to protect, not the hardware itself, protected through confidentiality, integrity, and availability. The CIA triad, ISO 27001, is built entirely around protecting information, in any form. An IT asset is any individually identifiable component: a laptop, a physical server, a virtual machine, a software license, even a dataset that has value to the organization and needs to be owned, tracked, and eventually retired. On the ITIL side, IT asset management exists to control the cost and life cycle of these items. On the ISO 27001 side, Annex A Control 5.9, Inventory of Assets, requires the exact same discipline: every asset identified, an owner assigned, and its status tracked. This is one of the clearest, most concrete overlaps between the two frameworks. The same asset register can satisfy both an ITIL practice and an ISO 27001 control. In summary, any component with value that must be tracked: hardware, software, data, licenses. Examples: a laptop, a database server, a VM, a Salesforce license. ITIL's IT asset management practice tracks cost, ownership and life cycle, ISO 27001 Annex A 5.9 requires the same thing, a maintained asset inventory. IT infrastructure is the underlying technical foundation, the networks, data centers, physical and virtual servers, storage, and cloud platforms that applications and services actually run on top of. It's what ITIL 4's infrastructure and platform management practice looks after, the engine room, not the process layer. For a GRC role, infrastructure is where a large share of technical controls live: firewall configurations, server hardening baselines, data center badge access, environmental monitoring. Understanding infrastructure means knowing where those controls should physically and logically sit. In summary, the technical foundation everything else runs on: networks, data centers, servers, storage, cloud platforms, operating systems. ITIL's infrastructure and platform management practice owns this layer, the engine room. A GRC review tests physical and technical controls against. An IT service is what the business actually experiences, not the server, not the software license, but the outcome. I can send email, I can approve a loan, I can log in from home. ITIL defines a service as a means of enabling value co-creation by facilitating outcomes customers want, without the customer having to own the specific costs and risks involved. A service is the finished product built by combining infrastructure, assets, people, and process together. This is the layer a GRC professional ultimately reports risk against, because it's the layer the business and its regulators actually care about. In summary, what the business actually experiences and consumes. ITIL definition: a means of enabling value co-creation for the customer. Examples: email, core banking, VPN remote access, built by combining infrastructure plus assets plus people plus process. These three terms get used loosely, but a GRC professional has to keep them distinct, because each one carries different controls and different owners. An IT asset is a single, trackable component, one mail server. IT infrastructure is the collection of assets working together as a technical foundation, that mail server, sitting on the network, inside the data center. An IT service is the business outcome delivered on top of all of it. Meridian Bank's corporate email service, which employees rely on every day. When something goes wrong, a GRC professional has to trace all three layers: which service was affected, which infrastructure supported it, and which specific asset actually failed. In summary, asset equals a single owned component, a server, a license. Infrastructure equals the collection of assets forming the technical base, network plus data center plus servers. Service equals the outcome the business consumes, built on top of infrastructure, same object, three different lenses. GRC needs to move between all three. IT service management, or ITSM, is the discipline of planning, delivering, operating, and continually improving the way IT services are provided to customers. It asks one core question: are we delivering this service reliably, efficiently, and to the level we promised? It's carried out through practices like incident management, change enablement, problem management, and the service desk, the ones covered throughout this course, and ITIL is simply the most widely adopted framework for doing it well. In summary, the discipline of designing, delivering, and improving IT services answers: are we delivering reliably, efficiently, and to agreed levels, delivered through practices like incident, change, problem, and service desk. ITIL is the most widely adopted ITSM framework. Information security management is the discipline of protecting the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information, through a structured, risk-based system called an ISMS, an information security management system. Where ITSM asks, are we delivering this reliably, ISM asks a different question: are we managing the risk to this information and the assets that hold it? It's carried out through risk assessments, security policies, and a defined set of controls, and ISO/IEC 27001 is the internationally recognized framework for building and certifying an ISMs. In summary, the discipline of protecting information's confidentiality, integrity and availability, answers, are we managing risk to our information and assets, delivered through a risk-based information security management system, ISMS. ISO/IEC 27001 is the most widely adopted ISM framework. ITSM and information security management are not competitors, they're two different lenses looking at the same organization. ITSM is optimized for service delivery, it's process-driven, measured in SLAs, tickets, and uptime. ISM is optimized for risk reduction, it's risk-driven, measured in a risk register, a statement of applicability, and control effectiveness. They meet constantly in practice. A phishing email that compromises a mailbox is logged as an incident through ITSM's incident management process, but it's also a security incident that must be handled under ISM's incident response and reported per ISO 27001's Annex A 5.24 to 5.28. A GRC professional has to be fluent in both languages, because most real findings sit exactly at that intersection. In summary, ITSM optimizes for service delivery, ISM optimizes for risk reduction. ITSM is process-driven, tickets, SLAs, ISM is risk-driven, risk register. So a security incident is one incident type, handled by both disciplines at once. GRC professionals must speak both languages fluently. ISO/IEC 27001 is the international standard for establishing, operating, monitoring, and continually improving an information security management system. Its main body, clauses 4 through 10, covers organizational context, leadership commitment, risk planning, support, operation, performance evaluation, and improvement, the management backbone. Alongside it sits Annex A, a catalog of controls grouped into organizational, people, physical, and technological themes, covering things like access control, supplier relationships, and secure development. An organization builds a risk assessment, decides which Annex A controls apply in a statement of applicability, and is then audited against all of it for certification. In summary, the international standard for building and certifying an ISMS, structured around clauses 4 to 10, context, leadership, risk, operation, review, improvement. Annex A, a catalog of controls across organizational, people, physical and technological themes, requires risk assessment, a statement of applicability, and continual improvement. ITIL and ISO 27001 overlap because they're often describing the same real-world activity from two different angles. ITIL as an operational practice, ISO 27001 as a control requirement. Change enablement's approval workflow is the same evidence and auditor checks for Annex A 8.32, change management. The CMDB behind ITIL's service configuration management is the same inventory ISO 27001 requires under 5.9. Incident management's ticketing system feeds ISO 27001 security incident reporting. Access management maps to access control. Supplier management maps to supplier relationship security. And ITIL's guiding principle of continual improvement is structurally identical to ISO 27001's Clause 10. Mature organizations don't run these as two separate systems, they run one process and map it to both frameworks' requirements at once. The workflow moves through 6 steps: change enablement, incident management, access management, asset/CMDB, supplier management, and continual improvement. Here's how that plays out in practice. For change enablement, Meridian's CAB approval record for a firewall rule change is the exact evidence an ISO 27001 auditor samples for Control A.8.32. For incident management, a phishing-triggered account lockout is logged as an ITIL incident and simultaneously reported as a security incident under A.5.24. For access management, A quarterly user access review run through the Service Desk tool satisfies both ITIL Access Management and A.5.18. For Asset/CMDB, the CMDB used for ITIL service configuration management doubles as evidence for ISO 27001's Asset Inventory Control A.5.9. For supplier management, a cloud vendor's SLA review under ITIL Supplier Management also closes out A.5.19 Supplier Risk Assessment. For continual improvement, Meridian's quarterly service improvement plan is reused as evidence for the ISMS's Clause 10 continual improvement requirement. An IT audit is an independent evaluation of an organization's systems, infrastructure, and controls, to determine whether they safeguard assets, keep data accurate, and operate efficiently in line with objectives. It can be broad: a general IT controls review covering access, change, and backups across the environment, or narrow, focused on one application, one regulation, or one business process. It's often based on a framework like COBIT, on Sarbanes-Oxley IT general controls, or on a specific standard like PCI DSS, rather than on any single fixed rulebook. The output is a set of findings, each rated by risk, paired with a management action plan and a deadline. In summary, an independent check that IT systems and controls work as intended can be broad, general IT controls, or narrow, one application, one regulation, common bases, internal policy, COBIT, SOX ITGCs, PCI DSS, produces findings, risk ratings, and management action plans. An ISMS audit is an audit performed specifically against ISO/IEC 27001, checking whether the Information Security Management System's policies, risk treatment plan, and Annex A controls, as declared in the Statement of Applicability, are properly implemented and effectively operating. Internally, Clause 9.2 requires the organization to run its own ISMS audits at planned intervals, often using trained internal auditors. Externally, a certification body runs a Stage 1 audit reviewing documentation readiness, then a Stage 2 audit testing real implementation, followed by annual surveillance audits to keep the certificate valid. Findings are classified as major or minor nonconformities, and unresolved major findings can block or suspend certification. The workflow moves through 4 steps: internal ISMS audit, Stage 1, docs, Stage 2, certification, and surveillance. Here's how that plays out in practice. For internal ISMS audit, Meridian's internal audit team tests 15 Annex A controls against the Statement of Applicability before the external audit. For Stage 1, docs, the certification body reviews Meridian's ISMS policies and risk treatment plan for completeness. For Stage 2, certification auditors sample real evidence access logs, CAB records, training completion to test if controls actually operate. For surveillance, 1 year later, a lighter annual audit confirms the ISMS is still being maintained. The two are easy to confuse, so it's worth being precise. Scope: an IT audit can examine any part of the IT environment, an ERP system, a data warehouse, a specific regulation, while an ISMS audit is bounded strictly by whatever is declared in the Statement of Applicability. Basis: an IT audit might be built around COBIT, SOX, or internal policy, while an ISMS audit is measured only against ISO 27001's clauses and Annex A controls. Outcome: an IT audit produces findings and recommendations, while an external ISMS audit can actually grant, withhold, or revoke a certificate. And the auditor: IT audits are commonly run by internal audit teams or consultancies, while certification stage ISMS audits must be performed by an accredited certification body, though internal ISMS audits can be run by internal staff holding an ISO 27001 lead auditor qualification. In summary, scope: IT audit can cover anything IT. ISMS audit is bounded by the Statement of Applicability. Basis: IT audit may use COBIT/SOX/internal policy. ISM's audit uses ISO 27001 clauses and Annex A only. Outcome: IT audit gives findings. External ISM's audit can grant or revoke certification. Auditor: IT audit is often internal audit or consulting. Certification: ISM's audits need accredited bodies. Nearly every audit, IT, ISM's, or SOX follows the same life cycle, and running it end-to-end multiple times is exactly what a GRC or IT auditor job description means by executed audit life cycles from planning to reporting. The workflow moves through 5 steps: planning and scoping, field work, testing, reporting, and follow-up. Here's how that plays out in practice. For planning and scoping, the audit team agrees the scope covers access and change management controls for Meridian's core banking application. For fieldwork, auditors pull a sample of 25 access requests and 25 change tickets directly from the ITSM tool. For testing, each sample is tested for design effectiveness and operating effectiveness, uncovering 3 changes deployed without CAB approval. For reporting, findings are written up with a risk rating, root cause, and a management action plan with owners and dates. For follow-up, the audit team revisits next cycle to confirm the CAB approval gap has actually been closed. This is arguably the single most important technical skill in a GRC role, and it's named directly in most job descriptions: identifying gaps in security controls design and operational effectiveness. Design effectiveness asks, if this control were performed exactly as written, would it actually prevent or detect the risk? A documented policy requiring MFA on all admin accounts has good design. Operating effectiveness asks a harder question: is it actually happening, consistently, by the right people, every time? Meridian's policy might be well designed, but if a sample of admin accounts shows 20% still have no MFA enrolled, that's an operating effectiveness gap. The control exists on paper but isn't functioning in practice. A GRC professional has to test both, because a beautifully designed control that nobody follows protects nobody. In summary, design effectiveness: would this control work if performed as written? Operating effectiveness: is it actually being performed, consistently, by the right people? A control can pass one test and fail the other. GRC has to test both. This is the single skill named directly in most GRC job descriptions. The job descriptions call for hands-on experience across networks, data center operations, service desk, and server management. Isn't asking for an engineering skill set, it's asking whether you can look at each of those domains and immediately see the control points. On networks, that means firewall rule reviews and network segmentation. In data center operations, it means physical access logs and environmental monitoring, the Annex A7 physical controls. The service desk matters because its ITSM tool is where almost all audit evidence actually lives: tickets, approvals, timestamps. And server management means patch compliance reports, hardening baselines, and privileged account reviews. A GRC professional who understands these domains operationally can spot a missing control just by knowing how the environment is supposed to work. In summary, networks, firewall rule reviews, segmentation, IDS/IPS logging, data center ops, badge access, CCTV retention, environmental and DR controls, service desk, the ITSM tool as the primary source of audit evidence, server management, patch compliance, hardening baselines, privileged access reviews. A finding that says CAB approval missing on 12% of sample changes means nothing to a business stakeholder until it's translated into risk. Unapproved changes could cause an outage or a security breach in the core banking platform. That translation, delivered clearly and calmly to a CISO, an IT director, or an audit committee, is a daily skill in GRC, not an occasional one. It also means negotiating realistic remediation timelines with people who don't report to you, and defending a finding when a client pushes back. That's exactly why excellent written and verbal communication and client-facing experience appear as hard requirements in almost every GRC job posting. Most of these roles are staffed directly onto client engagements. In summary, findings must be translated from technical gap to business risk. Presenting to CISOs, IT directors, and audit committees is routine, not exceptional. Remediation timelines are negotiated, not dictated. Most GRC roles are staffed onto client engagements, not back-office reviews. Running a GRC function is itself a program management exercise. Getting Meridian Bank through ISO 27001 certification means coordinating risk assessments, policy rewrites, control implementation, and evidence collection across a dozen teams, on a fixed external audit date. A SOX ITGC testing cycle runs on hard quarterly deadlines tied to financial reporting. And in consulting, a single GRC professional is often resourced across 2 or 3 client engagements at once, each with its own scope, timeline, and stakeholders. This is the same planning discipline as ITIL's plan activity in the service value chain, just applied to audits and compliance programs instead of service releases. In summary, an ISO 27001 certification program spans months, with many work streams. A SOX ITGC testing cycle runs on fixed quarterly deadlines, multiple client engagements often run in parallel, same discipline as ITIL's plan activity, applied to audit and compliance work. That's the full picture. IT Service Management, through ITIL, delivers the service. Information Security Management, through ISO 27001, protects the information running through it. Audit and GRC sit across both, verifying that controls aren't just designed well on paper but are actually operating day-to-day. Testing the exact vocabulary covered here: IT, information, assets, infrastructure, and services, and knowing precisely how each one differs and where risk lies inside it. None of that technical depth matters without the ability to run a full audit life cycle, manage a program of work, and explain a finding clearly to a client. That combination, ITSM fluency, security fundamentals, audit discipline, and client-facing communication, is what a GRC or IT auditor role is actually built on. In summary, ITSM, ITIL, delivers the service, ISM, ISO 27001, protects the information, audit and GRC verify both are designed well and actually operating. IT, information, assets, infrastructure and services are the vocabulary you test against. Client-facing delivery, communication and program management carry it all to the business.